Welcome to Guelph. As usual, this video is designed as an aid to exploration. Log off the computer, pull up this video on your phone, and go for a walk. Each time I'm done talking about a building, I'll throw up a map to get you to the next one. Pause the video and take a stroll. Indeed, feel free to wander off script for a while. I'll still be there when you get to the next site, and there's always another side street to explore. Guelph was established in 1827 by John Galt of the Canada Company. An attempt to systematically settle much of southwestern Ontario, the Canada Company had acquired a tract of land stretching from Guelph to Lake Huron, and established two new settlements at Guelph and Goderich, with the intention of filling in the land between them with farmers. John Galt, however, had larger ambitions, wishing to see the establishment of an aristocratic capital city, planned out around broad avenues and public squares. Galt's legacy to Guelph today consists mostly in the city's unusual street plan, but the city only really began to grow following its establishment as the seat of Wellington County in 1837, and especially the arrival of the Grand Trunk Railway in 1856. The 1860s were a period of extraordinary growth, and much of the city's stone architecture dates from the second half of the 19th century. The walk begins at the intersection of Wyndham and Carden streets. The towered building on the southeast corner of Wyndham and Carden was built in 1911 as the new home of the Grand Trunk Railway's Guelph facilities. The Grand Trunk Railway was the city's first railway, with tracks between Toronto and Guelph being completed in July of 1856 and pushed west to Stratford later that year. The earliest facilities on this site were rendered quickly inadequate as both Guelph and the Grand Trunk Railway prospered. Accordingly, a new building was erected in 1911, featuring a dramatic central tower and substantially improving the railway's facilities in the city. The building continues to serve as a railway station to the present day. Across the street from the railway station, on the southwest corner of Wyndham and Carden, is Guelph City Hall. Opened in 1857, the building was designed by Toronto architect William Thomas, one of the most important architects in early Ontario. The structure is a classic Georgian institutional structure, and when built was one of the finest such buildings west of Montreal. The building once featured a large clock tower, removed in 1961, but otherwise remains in excellent shape to the present day. If you're interested, pass briefly under the railway tracks to see Guelph's Armory building, erected in 1906, to plans from the Department of Public Works. Alternately, or when you're done, walk north a block on Wyndham Street to McDonald Street. Downtown Guelph is filled with fine stone architecture. On the northwest corner of Wyndham and McDonald, you'll see Medical Hall, a former apothecary's shop built in 1859. Look for the towered building on the northeast corner of the intersection. The large stone tower of the Peter Kelly building dominates the intersection of McDonald and Wyndham. Built in 1882, the structure was originally home to the meeting hall of the International Order of Odd Fellows. Immediately to the north, the Petrie building is the oldest building in Guelph with a cast iron facade, and one of only two such buildings in Ontario predating 1890. Cast iron facades became extremely popular in the late 19th and early 20th century, as they allowed for the easy mass production of ornamentation, which could be shipped across North America. The facade of the Petrie building was manufactured in Ohio by Bakewell and Mullins. Designed by local architect John Day in 1882, the building had fallen into significant disrepair before being extensively restored in 2015. Walk north 2 blocks on Wyndham Street. The street is an active commercial strip, lined with excellent stone architecture on either side. You'll emerge into St. George's Square, a large open space. St. George's Square has historically been Guelph's central urban space, with major public celebrations taking place here, and roads and streetcar lines converging here. The square began its life as the home of St. George's Anglican Church. Set aside for the Anglicans in Galt's original town plan, a church was built on the location in 1833, replaced by a second, larger structure designed by William Thomas in 1851. A generation later, however, the congregation was rapidly outgrowing their building, while Guelph was seeking a location for a central public square. Accordingly, in 1873, St. George's Church vacated the new square for their third and present structure on Woolwich Street. The most important structure to have been located on the square was unquestionably the old post office and customs house, built in 1876. Originally a simple Second Empire structure, the building was dramatically expanded in 1902, adding an extra story and a clock tower, which dominated the square. The building was typical of the large and ornate structures built by the federal government throughout the Victorian period, in an effort to emphasize the stability and permanence of the then new Dominion. Time has not been kind to St. George's Square. In addition to the tragic demolition of the old post office in 1960, the square has also lost all three of the 19th century banks which once surrounded it. In addition, the gardens which once graced the center of the square have been done away with, first bisected by streetcar lines, and then removed altogether in favor of the automobile. Continue north along Wyndham Street. You're looking for the former post office at 138 Wyndham. One of the few Art Deco buildings in Guelph, the Dominion Public Building was built in 1936, in the depths of the Great Depression, part of an extensive building program undertaken by the federal government to provide much-needed jobs across the country. An outstanding piece of architecture, the building was designed by Toronto architect Vaux Chadwick, and when originally built, housed the post office and a variety of federal offices. The building's original lobby survives to the present day. Further up Wyndham Street, on the southeast corner of Wyndham and Woolwich, is the former Wellington Hotel. Built in 1877, the hotel was designed by Victor Stewart, one of Guelph's leading architects in the mid-19th century, and is among the city's finest Second Empire structures. The building's prominent tower dominates the view south along Woolwich Street. The building was gutted by fire in 1975, but rebuilt within the existing walls. Across the street from the Wellington Hotel, on the southwest corner of Wyndham and Woolwich, is the former site of the Griffin Royal Opera House, built in 1894 to plans by Harry Powell of Stratford. For decades the city's leading theatre, the Opera House could seat 1,200 people, a number which represented a full tenth of Guelph's population in the 1890s. Changing technology, however, ate away at the theatre's audiences. In the 1920s, it was converted into a movie theater, and the building was finally demolished in 1953. Walk 2 blocks west on Woolwich Street, then turn left onto Yarmouth. The large industrial building at 37 Yarmouth is the former Raymond Sewing Machine Factory, built in 1875 and renovated into apartments in 1980. Stop at the 5-way intersection of Yarmouth, Quebec, Norfolk, and Paisley. On the northeast corner of Norfolk and Paisley Streets, you'll see Guelph's Central Library branch. There have been libraries in Guelph since the 1830s, but it wasn't until 1883 that the city of Guelph officially established a public library system. As the city grew, the library's facilities became increasingly inadequate, until in 1902 the library applied for a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to help with the construction of a new building. The new structure was built the following year, to plans by local architect William Colwell. An impressive classical structure, the building was significantly more ornate than most Carnegie libraries of its size, and indeed the Carnegie Foundation had objected to the design as excessively extravagant. By the time the objections were registered, however, the grant had already been issued. The building was demolished in 1965, following an extensive heritage fight, and was replaced by the present Central Library building. Immediately east of the public library, on the northeast corner of Yarmouth and Quebec, is the site of Guelph's former YMCA. The YMCA in the city was founded in 1886 and occupied temporary quarters until 1910, when Walter Buckingham agreed to sell his property to the institution at a fraction of its cost. Fundraising for a new building commenced immediately, and the doors opened on the structure, designed by William Mahoney, in 1912. The structure contained extensive facilities for indoor sports, but was abandoned for new facilities outside downtown in 1965. Shortly after, the building was replaced by an apartment tower. East of the YMCA, you'll see Knox Presbyterian Church. In the mid-19th century, the Presbyterian Church in Canada was sundered by theological and organizational divisions between those who did and did not want formal ties to the Presbyterian Church back in Scotland, and those who did and did not want formal ties to the colonial government in Upper Canada. By the 1870s, those divisions had spread to the point where there were no less than 4 Presbyterian churches in central Guelph, 2 of them nearly next door on Quebec Street. Of the 2, Knox was the older congregation, dating to 1847. The current building, a monumental Gothic structure, was erected in 1869. A few doors further east, at 50 Quebec Street, is the former Chalmers Presbyterian Church, erected in 18 to plans by the prominent Toronto architect Henry Langley. The congregation formed following a split in the Knox congregation, resulting in the construction of 2 fine stone Presbyterian churches less than a block from one another. The country's several Presbyterian denominations would formally reconcile in 1875, but there continue to be several Presbyterian congregations in central Guelph to the present day. Continue east. pass back through St. George's Square, leaving the square on Douglas Street. You're approaching the county courthouse, and as such many of the buildings along Douglas Street had some association with the county government when they were built. Those include the county solicitor's building at 15 Douglas Street, built in 1866, and the Crown Attorney's building at 25 Douglas Street, designed by John Hall in 1885. Our immediate concern, however, is with the church whose tower has been dominating your walk down Douglas Street. St. George's Anglican is the oldest religious congregation in Guelph, dating to 1833. Originally, the congregation had been granted the land which currently comprises St. George's Square, but by the late 1860s, the congregation was outgrowing its existing building, and a growing desire was being expressed for a central public square. A solution to both problems presented itself when the congregation acquired land on the river in 1873 and the old church removed, bequeathing its name to the square that replaced it. St. George's possesses one of the most impressive interiors in Guelph, and the nave is well worth stepping into if you have the chance. Turning right, walk south on Woolwich Street. You're looking for the castle-like former courthouse at 74 Woolwich Street. The County of Wellington was created in 1837, as European settlement in the area was just beginning to accelerate, and initially the county extended northwest from Guelph as far as Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. As the area became more densely settled, several new counties would be carved out of Wellington, but when this courthouse was built in 1841, those divisions remained in the future. Designed by Toronto architect Thomas Young, the building's appearance was unusual for its day, a time when classical styles of architecture were considered essential for public architecture. Despite several expansions over the course of the building's life and the relocation of the main entrance, the original facade continues to grace Woolwich Street. Continue south along Woolwich. Stop at the stone wall located in John Galt Park, just beyond the River Run Centre. This wall is all that remains of the Canadian Pacific Railway's freight house, destroyed in a 1991 fire. Chafing under the monopoly of the Grand Trunk Railway, the city of Guelph had incorporated the Guelph Junction Railway to lay tracks from the city to the Canadian Pacific's main line 15 miles to the south. Not desiring to engage in the operation of a railway, the city leased the new line to the Canadian Pacific. The original passenger station was further to the south, and an important element of Guelph's history in its own right. John Galt's log cabin, known as the Priory, was built in 1827, the first building erected in Guelph. While the earliest building in a given settlement is typically a makeshift structure of no great interest, the size and porticoed entry of the Priory reflected Galt's aristocratic ambitions, and the structure survived long enough to be pressed into service as the Canadian Pacific's first station in Guelph, a role it played for over a generation. The Canadian Pacific eventually expanded its service in Guelph, extending its trackage northwest to Godrich, and erecting a new passenger station in 1911. The Priory was allowed to crumble once the Canadian Pacific moved out, and was finally demolished in 1926. Continue south along Woolwich Street to McDonald, then turn right. As you go, notice the blacksmith statue atop the fountain in Priory Park. The fountain was originally installed in St. George's Square in 1885, but was relocated as a result of the square's reconfiguration in the mid-20th century. Our walk ends, however, at the impressive Roman Catholic Church, which terminates the west end of McDonald Street. The original town plot of Guelph had included land set aside for the construction of a Roman Catholic church on a hill overlooking the town. The choice site had been set aside thanks to Bishop Alexander MacDonald, who had been instrumental in securing the town site for Galt. A simple building had been erected on the site in the 1830s, followed by a much more impressive structure, St. Bartholomew's Church, in 1844. The spectacular structure which graces the site today, however, is the Basilica of Our Lady Immaculate, dating to 1880. Construction had started in 1876, under the supervision of Joseph Connolly, a young and talented Irish immigrant who would go on to be the favoured architect of the Roman Catholic Church in Ontario, designing churches in Toronto, London, Hamilton, and Chatham. The Basilica of Our Lady Immaculate once sat at the centre of a large complex of Catholic institutions, including a convent and school. Today it stands isolated by parking lots, but continues to dominate the Guelph skyline. Indeed, the church's position on the skyline is today protected by law. Buildings above a certain height are forbidden in places where they would block the view of the basilica. The building's towers are a late addition, having been omitted from the original construction projects for reasons of cost, and subsequently completed in 1926. The interior of the basilica is arguably the finest interior space in the city, and well worth stepping into. Alternately, you could join us on a second walk in Guelph's West End. There's a link in the description.